Yo, what's going on, YouTube? And welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy, Kevin Forte. And today, guys, pack your bags. We got a long video today, so if you're going to grab your potato chips, your whatever you're going to end up eating, this is going to be a long video today. I might actually turn it into a series if you guys like how it goes, if you like the format. So let me know in the comments down below if you like the format of today's video, because I might be looking to do it throughout this summer. So basically, we are going to pretend we are Lou Lamoriello of the New York Islanders. Shout out the New York Saints, Bruce Cassidy and the Boston Bruins. Thank you for that little note last year. But moving on, so we're talking about Lou Lamoriello. We're going to be Lou Lamoriello in today's video. That might be a scary thought, right? But we are going to pretend we're Lou Lamoriello. We're the general manager of the New York Islanders. And looking at the roster right now, what could we do to fix this New York Islanders hockey team? So I tried to put my blend of what I would like the Islanders to do and what I think Lou would do as the GM of the Islanders. So there's a couple of things here where it's, if this doesn't happen, then this will happen. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we get into it. So looking at the New York Islanders lineup, that's where we're going to start today's video. So the New York Islanders lineup today, at the end of today's season, what do we have? So this obviously is the last game of the season, and everything was already kind of over for the Islanders. I think my mic moved. Okay, alright, I think I fixed it. Alright, so this was the Islanders lineup on April 29th, 2022. So this was the end of the season. Kiefer Bellows, Brock Nelson, Josh Bailey, Zach Parise, Matt Barzal, and Kyle Palmieri. So that's your top six. Now, obviously, there's guys that are normally in the top six there that are not. Anders Lee and potentially Anthony Beauvillier and Oliver Wahlstrom. The Islanders completely botched the lines at the end of the year. I think Trotz was just trying to see what was there. And again, this is according to Daily Faceoff, so again, this is, at this point, it's kind of meaningless because the season's over. Then defense, you have Chara, Dobson, Pelech, Pulak, Salo, and Green. Which for the most part, other than Salo, that was pretty much the defensive pairings throughout the year. And again, the caveat there is Scott Mayfield, but he was injured for the remainder of the season, so he is not on there. Obviously, Cal Clutterbuck also for the forwards. Normally in the lineup, he's not in here as well. And Sebastian Aho on the blue line. In between the pipes, we have Semyon Varlamov and Ilya Sorokin, which, again, I think that's pretty much, if you're an Islander fan, you know that's to be expected. So then we have some questions. So this is from Lou Lamoriello's press conference the other day at the end of the season. And, he said we need to improve our defense. And I completely agree with that. I mean, you look at this defense, it's a pretty old defense. You got Chara in there, you got Green. The two of them combined, I think is like 40 years old, if not older than that. Those two guys have to go. And listen, I like Chara, I like Green. They're great people. But in terms of play, they made a lot of mistakes this year. And as the game, as fast as it was this year, the NHL will be faster next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. The NHL is not slowing down, or it's not slowing down its pace of getting quicker. The game continues to get faster, and guys like Green and Chara become more obsolete and really, to be honest, more of a liability. So we're at the point in today's league where those guys are really dinosaurs because they cannot keep up. And Father Time has kind of caught up with them as well. They're at the point where they're just getting old. And there were a couple plays in front of the net where Green wasn't strong enough. Chara wasn't able to get back to the front fast enough. It's just those guys are a liability at this point. And again, really good dudes, really good men, but they got to go. So that's my first thing. Looking at that lineup, definitely need to see an improvement on the defense. I think they're going to start with those two guys getting the boot. Now, Lou said he wants to make some hockey deals with the forwards to improve their forwards or potentially trade some forwards in order to pick up some defensemen. So we'll get to that in a second because that does play into what we're going to talk about today. So, here is what I'd like to see Lou Lamoriello and the New York Islanders do this offseason. So first things first, guys that they will not re-sign. I already talked about that. You're going to see Chara and Andy Green out. I just don't think it makes sense for them to stay with the Islanders right now. Unfortunately, they're, like I said, they're more of a liability at this point. And I think that the Islanders need to look at getting younger and honestly a little bit stronger on that blue line. So now let's get into some of the moves we're going to make, because those are the only two guys that I think the Islanders should not re-sign this year. I think for the most part, most of these Islanders are here long term, so you're not going to see any real moves there. So here's where we see some changes. So the New York Islanders, now this one's going to be, a little bit polarizing, a little bit controversial. But Josh Bailey getting traded. I think the Islanders should trade Josh Bailey. There was some talk around the trade deadline that the Islanders may look to explore that. Lou decided to stick with the group. I think this is the time that he makes this move. He's going to free up $5 million up until 2024. So it's a $5 million contract and a 2023 second round pick going to the Seattle Kraken. The Seattle Kraken needs some more forward depth, a little bit tougher to play against, some scoring prowess. Josh Bailey does bring that to the table. Now, he is a little bit frustrating in terms of his inability to finish, but he's definitely a guy that can be a leader, have some veteran presence there. He's been with the Islanders since I think he was drafted in 2005, 2006. He's been with his organization for an extremely long time. Might be 2009, maybe a little bit later. The 2009 draft, the year before John Tavares came in. So Bailey's been with this organization for over a decade. That would be a tough loss, but again, I think when you talk about tough decisions that have to be made, this might be one they have to make. So they trade Bailey and his $5 million cap hit and a 2023 second round pick to Seattle for left shot and right shot defenseman Vince Dunn of the Seattle Kraken. He's getting paid $4 million. Now, his contract does end next summer. So I could see Seattle saying, listen, we're not going to probably be able to re-sign this guy next summer. We might be looking to get a little younger on the blue line with some of the guys they could be drafting in this year's draft and next year's draft. So they might be thinking to themselves, Vince Dunn isn't going to be a long-term fixture here. The Islanders get a guy on a nice contract at $4 million. Now they are going to have to pay him. This is a guy that is going into next season, a pending unrestricted free agent in 2023. So the Islanders do have to consider that here. And maybe they try and lock him up long-term before the season in order to make sure they've got him here longer term. And I think they could look to do that. So the Islanders trade Bailey and a second round pick for Vince Dunn. That honestly might be too good of a package. I mean, I'm being very fair with this. You have to look at it as Bailey has been struggling a little bit this season, and you're giving a little incentive here to Seattle, giving them the pick. But again, if you're getting Vince Dunn, who is a very good player, that might be what the price is. Now, again, you might be able to get a third or a fourth in there instead. It's more of a sweetener. But again, I think I'm just being overly generous, and maybe you end up knocking that to a third or fourth round pick, because again, they're getting 2 years of Josh Bailey, a top 6 forward, for a top 4 defenseman in Vince Dunn, whose contract ends next summer. So Lou Lamoriello might be able to finagle that a little bit. We have another trade. So I think the Islanders, again, rumors have swirled around Anthony Beauvillier. So I think the New York Islanders could trade Anthony Beauvillier and his $4.15 million cap hit. Now, here's the thing. This is where things get a little bit weird. So what you're looking at here is a trade where you have to look at where's the incentive here. So the Montreal Canadiens have spent the most money in the National Hockey League. They have the highest cap hit in the league. So this trade allows them to alleviate themselves of some cap space, and they're going to shed some salary. So Anthony Beauvillier, who is from Montreal, I think he's from Quebec, his contract goes till 2024, so you get 2 years of Anthony Beauvillier on the books. More than likely, the Islanders won't have the money to re-sign Anthony Beauvillier in 2024, so you might be looking down the road and saying, listen, let's try and get some value for this guy, and we know that we're not going to keep him long term. Maybe this is something we could get done. Now Montreal in exchange trades forward Mike Hoffman and another forward here, Michael Pezzetta. Now, a lot of Montreal Canadiens fans like Michael Pezzetta, and this is the kind of guy that he reminds me a lot of a younger Matt Martin. He's that kind of player, and Michael Pezzetta maybe is going to be that type of player in the future of Matt Martin. He's that kind of guy. He's a blue, just a blue collar, chip on his shoulder type of forward. And he played fairly well for the Canadiens down the stretch. And I think he's got that little bit of snarl, that little bit of gnarl in his game. And I think that could be a really nice add. And obviously Mike Hoffman is another guy that can put the puck in the back of the net. Now there is some questions about some off-ice situations, obviously with his spouse and everything that's kind of happened in Ottawa. But for the most part, Mike Hoffman as a player struggled this season in Montreal. The Canadiens are looking to get themselves out from that cap hit. So they're going to save about a little less than $500,000 between just Hoffman and Beauvillier straight up. And for probably that next $1.5 million that Michael Pezzetta could get from the Islanders. So the Islanders end up losing money in the deal here. But again, that's the incentive for Montreal to make this trade, where they're trading two forwards for Anthony Beauvillier. Now, Beauvillier struggled in his own right this season. So this is a good hockey trade. And again, Michael Pezzetta has to be re-signed this summer. So the Islanders have to figure out, do they have enough cap to re-sign him, which I think they would be able to do. But I think that's what you're looking at here. And again, you have to remember, if you're trading guys like Bailey and Beauvillier, you need to replace them with guys like Hoffman and Pezzetta, which the Islanders would be doing in this trade. So I think this is a trade overall. Beauvillier gets a fresh start. Hoffman gets a fresh start. And the Islanders also get the sweetener of a pretty good player in Michael Pezzetta. And again, you have to remember that the Islanders are taking on that Hoffman contract, which he was not good this year. So it's a little bit of a reclamation project, but he has that scoring touch. He's a pure scoring player. And under this new coaching staff for the Islanders, I think a guy like Mike Hoffman could end up being a fit with the Islanders' potential new system that they implement. So expect that to be something that, if you're looking at the Islanders, that could be something we're looking at here. Now I have the third trade. This is the third trade that I really was reluctant to do, because you're making deals with the devil, which is Joe Sakic of the Colorado Avalanche. But I think that the Avalanche are going to be able to help the Islanders out here. So the New York Islanders trade Semyon Varlamov to the Colorado Avalanche. I think they are going to have to retain salary here in exchange for a 2023 first-round pick from the Colorado Avalanche. Now, some of you may debate this, because you may be saying, well, I don't think Avalanche fans may be saying, I don't think Varlamov's worth a first-round pick. And I could agree with you on that. Now, what if the Islanders retain some salary on that? Okay? The Islanders retain some salary on that deal, and his contract ends next summer. So this is another 1-year trial kind of thing here for Varlamov and the Avalanche. Now, Colorado knows Semyon Varlamov. He was their goaltender for a couple of seasons before he ended up signing with the Islanders. So there is reason to believe that there is a fit there. And I think that's something that, if you're the Islanders, yeah, it sucks you're trading away Sorokin's buddy and Semyon Varlamov, but this is something that you're saving $5 million, just purely $5 million off the cap hit. And that could be the difference here for the Islanders to add another big player, which I'm going to get to in a second. So I think that's something that, if you're the Islanders, you're looking at trading out Varley. You're trading out, hopefully, at least $3 million of that cap, right? Even if you retain $1.5–2 million of that cap hit, you're still saving money there. And you're getting a draft pick from Colorado, which, depending on how things go, the Islanders could trade that draft pick and their own first-round pick at the deadline, maybe in order to acquire some players at the trade deadline. Or they could kind of do what they did with the Calgary pick when they traded Travis Hamonic back in 2017, 2018. You got 2 first-round picks. You end up saying, all right, we'll keep it. We'll see what happens. All right, we're not a good team. We'll keep our first-round pick and their first-round pick and see what happens, right? So the Islanders have that flexibility at the deadline if they need to do so. So that's what we're looking at here. So to keep track, guys that are coming out, Josh Bailey, Anthony Beauvillier, and Semyon Varlamov all traded out this summer, which hurts, again, because Varlamov's been a good player here. Beauvillier and Bailey have been here since they were drafted. And you're also trading out, guys that are not returning, and Zdeno Chara and Andy Green. Now, you also have to remember, I'm also throwing that second-round pick, the 2023 second-round pick, in the Josh Bailey Vince Dunn trade, so that's another asset going out the door. Now, for keeping track with who's coming in, we have from the Montreal Canadiens, Michael Pezzetta and Mike Hoffman coming in, and Vince Dunn coming in for the New York Islanders on that blue line. You're also getting that first-round pick in 2023 from Colorado. And the thing is, the Avalanche don't have second or third-round picks for the next 3 years. So they would have to trade that first-round pick in order to get that deal done for Semyon Varlamov. All right, so that leads us into signings or things they could do at the draft. So the New York Islanders hold the 13th overall draft pick, and in my latest mock draft, which you guys will hopefully see here over the next couple of days, I have the Islanders selecting right winger Dania Yurov, which has the potential to be a pretty good NHL player. And again, it's the 13th overall pick. So teams may be willing to give up the value in order to acquire that type of player. But maybe that's not even the case. It may be a way for them to shed salary. So they use that 13th overall pick as a trade chip to send out for another player. And that's where we get to the Vegas Golden Knights. You could prey on the Vegas Golden Knights as they're looking to move out some salary. Kind of similar to Montreal. They have a problem where they have a lot of money on their roster. So, the only team ahead of Vegas in terms of money spent this year is the Montreal Canadiens. So the Vegas Golden Knights have spent $92 million on this roster that did not make the postseason. So who are some guys that could be on their way out? Well, they're not trading Eichel. They're not trading Stone. You could argue William Karlsson. He's got a lot of money on that deal. They're not trading Pietrangelo. So who are some guys they could trade? Well, Jonathan Marchessault is kind of an interesting player here. His contract ends in 2024. And he's getting paid $5 million per season. Now, he does have a modified no-trade clause, which does account for this. But I don't see the Islanders not being on that list. He has an 8-team no-trade list. And I don't foresee the Islanders being one of those 8 teams that isn't on his list. So I could see the Islanders going for a guy like Marchessault. Jonathan Marchessault is the kind of guy that, if you're looking at purely from Vegas, Vegas doesn't want draft picks, but they're freeing themselves of that $5 million. And if the Islanders don't retain anything on that, you could see that as a pure straight-up deal. Jonathan Marchessault for the 13th overall selection. And I actually think that's a pretty fair trade. I think that's a pretty good trade for Vegas. It's a win-win for them. They get the 13th overall pick in the draft, which they could also flip for something else, but they also free themselves of that $5 million. And the Islanders' perspective, they had to trade the 13th pick, but they're not looking for draft picks right now. They are in a position where I think Lou still sees the Islanders in a winning position where they can win. That's why he made the Barry Trotz move. He sees this as a team that can win and compete for a Stanley Cup next season. So if that's the case, you don't need the 13th overall pick. That guy's not going to help you for another 3 to 5 years. In Yurov, get a guy like Marchessault who can immediately help you. You're shedding some salary for Vegas, and you're also getting a guy that can help you right now. And Marchessault's a pretty good hockey player that can slot into that top 6 and drastically change your lineup. So I like that move for the Islanders. I think that's something that, if you're the Islanders, you have to think to yourself, I like where this is going with that type of trade. All right, so with that out of the way, let's take a look here. Now here's where I get a little bit, because here's the thing. If you're making this trade for Marchessault, you're probably not making that Mike Hoffman trade, because Mike Hoffman would go in that winger spot alongside Nelson on the second line. So, this is where I think it gets a little bit. So, if you're making the Josh Bailey trade, it might be for something else. But again, this is where things get a little bit sticky because there's only so many spots in that top six that I think the Islanders are willing to move guys, right? So you have to consider that. So that's one option for the Islanders winger position. Because like I said, I think the Islanders, if they get Vince Dunn in, I think that's your addition, right? That's your defensive addition. You don't have to go crazy. If you move Chara and Green out of the lineup and you put in Vince Dunn or a defenseman like that, right? Again, it's probably not going to be Vince Dunn, but hypothetically, right? There's something to be said for that. I think the Islanders could make that work. So that's what we have there. So that's one option. The other option is, let's say they get to free agency. Let's say they haven't made a trade yet. And let's say they trade Josh Bailey for draft picks to shed the salary, and they bring in a guy like Andre Burakovsky. Burakovsky is on fire right now for the Colorado Avalanche in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and he's going to price himself out of Colorado. I see him signing a 6-year, $6 million contract, maybe between 5 to 6 years. I think he's going to get a 5 or 6 year deal. $6 million per season. He might even get more than that, but I think the Islanders could get him in 5 years, $30 million, right? So the Islanders bring in Andre Burakovsky. Guys, there's a plethora of options out there. I think the Islanders, like, if Lou Lamoriello does not add a guy, if he does not trade Bailey and replace him with somebody, the Islanders are just doing themselves a disservice. Like, it's at the point where the Islanders have to find a way to bring some scoring depth in. I mean, in that first round series against Nashville, he literally put the puck through the net. Like, this guy has a hell of a shot. Yeah, he put it through the net. He ripped the netting. I mean, that's the kind of guy the Islanders need. That sounds good to me, right? I'll give him $6 million per year to do that every night. Maybe once a season if he rips it through the net, right? So that's a guy that I think the Islanders should definitely be looking at. So targets for guys that should be coming in: Jonathan Marchessault in Vegas, because you're helping them out with the salary. Burakovsky could just be a victim of a successful season in Colorado and price himself out. So Burakovsky in free agency. And again, I think guys like Mike Hoffman could be in there, maybe to a lesser extent. You know, a guy like Mike Hoffman could be a guy that comes in and kind of does that for the Islanders. So that's what we have there. Now, here's the other thing. Who are some guys from Bridgeport that could come into the equation? Because, again, if you're moving a lot of these guys out, if you're moving Beauvillier, if you're moving guys like Bailey, you need to replace those guys with guys, in my opinion, you have to replace them with guys in your depth chart. And I think the Islanders have a plethora of guys in the depth chart in training camp that could fight their way into the Islanders lineup because they're cheap. Again, when you're spending more money on guys like Marchessault and Burakovsky and Dunn, you have to replace some of that depth with cheap guys that can produce and are effective in the bottom six and probably on your third line defense. So who are some guys that can do that? Well, one guy that I think he's actually shown up in the NHL a little bit, and I think because of Barry Trotz, he really didn't get a fair shake, is Otto Koivula. I think Otto Koivula is a guy that when you look at him, is a guy that fits the mold of that Islanders bottom six really well. Looking at, let's see if I can find him here. I can't find him on the Islanders chart. Let's see. Where is Otto Koivula? There he is. So what I really like about this kid, 23 years old. He was a 2016 fourth round draft pick. 6'4", 220 pounds. And he's still 23 years old. Now, he is up for a new contract for the Islanders, and you wonder does he want to stay with the Islanders, because he really hasn't gotten a ton of NHL experience. So that's a guy you could look at. I don't think the Islanders are going to keep Michael Dal-Colle. That sucks. That was a guy that was a 5th overall pick. Fuck. That one hurts. But I think the Islanders will let go of Michael Dal-Colle. Austin Czarnik, again, another guy with the new mentality of the Islanders. I could see Czarnik going bye-bye. The Islanders, as little cap as it really helps, is it even worth buying out Richard Panik? I mean, you could save yourself almost $2 million in year one if you buy out Richard Panik. So the Islanders could buy out Richard Panik. That's almost, $1.6 million. Ah, man. This is the thing. Like, the Islanders have some tough decisions to make, and that $1.6 million could be the difference for the Islanders bringing in a Vince Dunn, right? Or a Jonathan Marchessault. Some other guys that will definitely get some opportunity here in the lineup. Blade Jenkins was a pretty good player. He's on the final year of his entry-level deal next year. Same thing for Reese Newkirk. A lot of people have been comparing Newkirk to Casey Cizikas, which I think is definitely a praise to him. So you're looking at Jenkins, Newkirk, Koivula, obviously Arttu Räty, who was a second-round pick of the Islanders and was projected to be the first overall pick in last year's draft and completely fell down the chart based off of some issues during the season he had in Europe. Simon Holmstrom, who was their 2019 first-round pick, I want to say. Actually, he might have been 2019 first-round pick. Simon Holmstrom, I think he's going to get an opportunity for a spot in the bottom six. And then guys that we've obviously seen already, guys like Oliver Wahlstrom, and Kiefer Bellows. I think that Lou Lamoriello is going to put an emphasis on seeing more of the younger guys in the lineup, because I think that was something. If you took nothing away from Barry Trotz being fired and that Lou Lamoriello press conference, he wants to see the younger guys get some opportunity in the lineup. And we saw a lot of guys like Cal Clutterbuck and Matt Martin, and even for that matter, Zach Parise. Those guys struggled last season, and I could see the Islanders going with some younger guys like Kiefer Bellows, like a guy like Koivula, like Wahlstrom, Simon Holmstrom, Arttu Räty. Don't be surprised if there's a shocker that comes into the lineup for the Islanders next year. Because again, like I keep harping on, if the Islanders are going to get rid of Beauvillier and Bailey and start replacing some of those guys, you need to bring in younger guys on cheaper cap hits in order to do that. That's how good teams get it done. And you look at a team like Toronto right now. I mean, Michael Bunting signed $1 million, and he's going to win. He might win the Calder Trophy because Kyle Dubas brought in a guy that was a cheap contract, that was kind of a reclamation project, that was able to come in and produce at a low cap hit. And that's what the really good hockey teams are able to do. Colorado, with guys like Nicholas Aube-Kubel, Val Nichushkin. I mean, this is the type of guys you have to bring in. And I think the Islanders, considering what they've been able to draft over the last couple of seasons, they do have a lot of, maybe not quality draft picks, but guys that can play in that bottom six. And I think the Islanders have enough talent in the top six. If they want to bring in guys like Marchessault and Burakovsky, they can do that. I think they're they're an attractive enough team still with guys like Barzal and Lee and some of that other talent that the Islanders can attract players to their market. So now that leads us to the goalies. So if we're going to trade out Varlamov, what is it going to be? Well, I think we saw toward the end of the season, it was the Ilya Sorokin show. Sorokin was the starting goalie, and I think they can call up a goalie that's been playing in Bridgeport last season, and that's Jakub Skarek. He's going to be on the final year of his entry-level contract. He's going to be 23 years old to start next season. And I think Jakub Skarek is a goalie that the Islanders like, and I think they want to see more of. And the Islanders do have a goalie in Sweden that they drafted who I think could start in Bridgeport next season. So if that's the case, you don't necessarily need Skarek next year in the AHL. And like I said, he's 23 years old, so give him some starts in the NHL. Even if, let's say Sorokin plays 50 games. Let's say it's a 55-30 split, right? Something like that. Obviously, there's not 85 games in the season, but let's say Sorokin gets between 50 to 60 starts, and then you have Jakub Skarek get some starts. I think the Islanders could definitely do that. And some people may say, he's too young, don't put him into that spot, but I think the Islanders should do that. And again, you save yourself $5 million in between the pipes by using Skarek over Varlamov. And I know the Islanders like their 1A, 1B option, but guys, in today's NHL climate, we know young goalies on very low contracts, you look at who's in, maybe to their detriment, but in Pittsburgh, Louis Domingue, what is he making? $750,000, right? Okay, so here are some of the goalies. So the Islanders right now in Liga, they have Henrik Tikkanen, who is a goalie that I think the Islanders will look at. And he was he was a seventh round pick back in 2020. So maybe that's not a guy the Islanders are super high on. But maybe Tikkanen comes in as a goalie next year, right? They've got Schneider, Appleby, and Tikkanen potentially next season. So maybe the Islanders decide to do something like that. His numbers were not great, Henrik Tikkanen. But again, you have Jakob Skarek, who I think the Islanders like. So with that said, let's look at who goes in and out here. So guys that are going out, just to recap, we have Bailey, Beauvillier, and Varlamov all getting traded out. Green and Chara are not re-signed. And they also give up their 2023 second round pick. Things that are coming in. They acquire that 2023 draft pick, whatever pick it is for Varlamov, whether it's a first, second, third round pick, whatever the hell it is for Semyon Varlamov. They also call up some guys from the American Hockey League to start this season. Otto Koivula comes in. Jakob Skarek comes in behind Ilya Sorokin. And then you also have some guys that get traded in, like Michael Pezzetta, Mike Hoffman, and Vince Dunn on the blue line. And I think the Islanders won't do much with their blue line. Like I said, I could see Sebastian Aho and Robin Salo being depth defensemen other than Chara and Green. And you obviously bring in Vince Dunn. I think that drastically improves your defense. Obviously, in free agency, you go the route of bringing in a guy like Andrei Burakovsky or Jonathan Marchessault, or whoever they get from Montreal, whether that's Mike Hoffman or whatever depth piece they want to get. Again, I don't think you need all of those players. You don't need Hoffman and Marchessault and Burakovsky, and quite frankly, the Islanders don't have the cap space to bring in all three of those guys. So realistically, let's take one of those guys, right? Whether that's Hoffman, Marchessault, or Burakovsky. The Islanders have a couple of different routes that they can take by doing that. And again, this is all, unfortunately, the casualty of a guy like Varlamov and Beauvillier and Bailey getting traded out. The Islanders have to create that cap flexibility. So let's say they trade out Bailey and Beauvillier. You then have the cap space to bring in a defenseman and a forward. Now, again, you also have to remember, the Islanders have to re-sign some of their guys that are already on the roster. And you have to consider in the next 2 years that Matt Barzal's contract is coming up. Matt Barzal is up for a new contract in 2023. So not this summer, but next summer. The Islanders have to have the cap space for that. So you don't want to tie yourself up too much with a Marchessault and Hoffman and Dunn. You probably get two guys here. The Islanders add two guys and they leave a couple $2 million, not only for next season, maybe as a rental at the deadline, but I'm also looking longer term here at Matt Barzal. You need to have that little cushy cushion there, because the only money that comes off the books next season, it would be Varlamov's contract, would be Richard Panik, and that's it, and Varlamov's already traded, so that doesn't really matter. So the Islanders, and not to mention, you also have to re-sign Oliver Wahlstrom in 2023, and you have to re-sign Noah Dobson this summer. So the Islanders need some cap flexibility. So like I said, let's say they move out Bailey, Beauvillier, and Varlamov. You bring in Dunn, one top six forward, and you re-sign Dobson. And that's it. And I think the Islanders, that's kind of it. That's where you stand. And unfortunately, the Islanders, in their salary cap situation, you only have so much room. And I think that's making enough changes to tweak the roster, but you're not really shaking up the core all that much. And if you look at it this way, Josh Bailey is an alternate captain. You have Anders Lee, Cal Clutterbuck as your assistants. Now that leaves room for another assistant to come in. Does that maybe become a Casey Zizekas? Or does that become a Brock Nelson, a Matt Barzal? And that creates another discussion for next year with Josh Bailey's departure. So I think there's just a couple little things that the Islanders can do here to fix this roster. And I think this is a really good Islanders hockey team. This is a team that maybe the message did get stale with Barry Trotz. And you could, at points during this season, you could kind of see that. The Islanders were not playing the system that Barry Trotz has instilled in them for the past 2 years. And maybe the message just got stale. And the team just kind of got mentally tired from what we saw them do. And you have to remember, the last 2 seasons before this year, the Islanders were playing shorter seasons, right? The 2020 playoff bubble and last season, which was a 56-game schedule, the Islanders had played shorter seasons. They hadn't played that full 82-game stretch like they did this year and in the Barry Trotz era. So it just so happens the first season that Barry Trotz has a full 82-game schedule, his team can't compete at that same level. I don't think that's necessarily, that is not necessarily a coincidence. I think there is something to that. And I think the way the Islanders play, it was just so much of a grind that I think it wore the team down. And I think a new voice in there, some changes here, I think the Islanders will be okay. But the question is, what is Lou going to do? Because if he does take that 13th overall pick, you're looking at a guy that's going to be here when the window is already closing. So that doesn't really help you, right? If, let's say they got, what's his name? Dania Yurov, right? Hypothetically. You're not going to see that guy in the cup window. That's when the cup window kind of closes when he comes in. So what's the point of having that? Trade that first round pick, bring in a defenseman, bring in a forward, whatever it is, and fix some of those little things. Maybe trading out some salary in order for the Islanders to stay under the salary cap ceiling. Because like I said, next summer's going to be another bruiser. You have to re-sign Wahlstrom and Barzal. And those guys aren't going to be cheap, especially when I think Wahlstrom's going to have a breakout season next year. And obviously Matt Barzal, I think, is going to put up some more points. You might be looking at him being closer to a point per game next year. And again, obviously with Wahlstrom hopefully on his line, I think the Islanders could be a lot better next season. So to end today's video, let's take a look at the lineup for the Islanders. So this is my projected lineups for opening night for the 2022-23 NHL season. In the top 6, we have Anders Lee, Matt Barzal, and Oliver Wahlstrom. I think the Islanders will finally put Barzy on the top line. And no discredit to Nelson, who had an incredible season this past year. I just think that Barzal, in a contract season, he's going to want to play first line minutes. And you kind of have to cater that to him. I know Lou Lamoriello doesn't necessarily do that, but I think in this case he does have to do that. Lee, Barzal, and Wahlstrom. You have the Chris Kreider-esque player in front of the net with Anders Lee, Barzal, the puck-moving playmaker, and Wahlstrom, who is your finisher. He can score the goals. And that's kind of a balance to the second line, which you have Marchessault, Burakovsky, or Hoffman. I'm not saying all 3 of those guys come to the Islanders. Give me one of those 3 guys, and I think he could go on the left side alongside Nelson and Kyle Palmieri. That's an established, really balanced top 6, and I think that's a top 6 that can compete with pretty much anybody, not only in the Eastern Conference, but in the entire National Hockey League. I think the Islanders have a strength in that top 6. They have Nelson, who's solid. They have Barzal. That's a great 1-2 punch in your center core. You also have Palmieri, who he just could not catch a break last season. He had at least 15 goals taken back last season. I expect him to produce more. You have Marchessault, who's a tough guy that can forecheck really well. He's the, kind of the playmaker. Nelson, who could bring the puck in, and obviously Palms, who can put the puck in the back of the net and hopefully not get so many of them called back next season. In the bottom 6, we don't see much change here. Guys that have been on the roster already. Pajot is a great third-line center. You have Parise coming back. Bellows, who's a little bit on the younger side, but I think the Islanders, Lou Lamoriello is going to bring in a coach that will play guys like Wahlstrom and Bellows more consistently. So I think Bellows is going to get more of an opportunity. He has to get re-upped this year. Maybe look at him getting a 1 or 2 year bridge deal this summer by Lou. I think the Islanders bring him back. You look at the fourth line, you've got Matt Martin, Cizikas, and Cal Clutterbuck. The infamous identity line for the New York Islanders returns. And maybe a little bit of a different shift here in terms of the guys on the potential scratch pad for their forward group. I like Michael Pezzetta in Montreal. If the Islanders could find a way to get him, I'm really kind of a fanboy for that guy. He played really well and kind of a complimentary piece to, say, a Martin or Clutterbuck getting hurt. He could jump in there. He could also jump into the third line if a Bellows or Parise replacement, just to change things up. He could really come in there really nicely. Otto Koivula, I don't think Johnston or Pezzetta can play center, so Koivula is the kind of guy that can play in the third or fourth line that I think is a really good piece, as well as Ross Johnston. We know Ross the Boss is that kind of guy. He's here till 2026. The Islanders aren't moving him anytime soon. I think this is a really good piece for the Islanders. And again, it's not a great group there. None of those guys can really score, but that is the identity of the New York Islanders. And I think the Islanders are that kind of team that they're just going to be tough to play against with this kind of group. And when you have guys like Koivula at the frame that he's at, Johnston and Pezzetta on the scratch pad that could come in and out of the lineup, this is a tough forward group to play against. They may not be the most skilled, right? I think Colorado on paper is going to have more skill. The Rangers might have more skill. A lot of teams around the league will probably have more skill, but the Islanders, just between lines 1 through 4, will have more depth. And I think that is the key to the Islanders' success in those 2 years of that cup run. And I think we could see that as well on the blue line. Looking at their defense, Adam Pelech and Ryan Pulock, I think that has to be your top pair next season. A really good second pair here, a great replacement to Chara. You bring in Vince Dunn alongside Dobson. The Islanders have to bring somebody to play on that left shot with Dauber, and I think Dobson's going to see a huge season once again next year playing alongside Vince Dunn. That's a really good, reliable shutdown defenseman that can move the puck as well alongside Dobson. Great compliments to each other. And the third pair, we see a younger guy come in, whether that's Sebastian Aho or Robin Salo jumping in there, as well as Scott Mayfield on the right side. He may be a guy that gets traded as well this summer to alleviate a little bit of cap space. I don't want to see them trade Scott Mayfield, but that is a potential reality as his contract ends in 2023, and I don't think the Islanders will have the cap space to re-sign him next year. So that is something to consider as well. The only problem with trading Mayfield is I don't see any depth behind Mayfield and Salo and Aho that's really there for the Islanders. The Islanders would have to make some trades to add some more defensemen if they were to do that. So that's what we're looking at for the defense. And then obviously for goaltending, your starting goalies, I like Ilya Sorokin. That is your starter next year. That is what you're building this franchise around on the goaltending side of things. He is here till 2024. And Jakub Skarek getting some starts in the National Hockey League. I think he's at that age now. He's ripe. He's 23, 24 years old coming into training camp. And I think the Islanders, if they, unfortunately, the casualty of the salary cap era, may have to move on from Semyon Varlamov. And that is your New York Islanders, my projections for the 2022-23 New York Islanders. Guys, let me know what you think of this video in the comment section down below. What do you think of my takes here? I think the Islanders, like I said, for the most part, they got some really good pieces, but some things here and there the Islanders need to improve upon. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.